Thank you. And I think we've got a great panel for you here today. So we're going to be talking about the issue of misinformation, disinformation, fake news, deepfake. There's lots of different words for it these days. But the problem is that it has huge potential to destabilize our societies, our trust in institutions, our trust in facts, and of course our trust in the democratic process. And in fact, WEF this year, in its analysis of 1,500 different think tanks, quoted that disinformation and misinformation was one of the highest short-term risks faced by society today. But disinformation has been around for centuries. It first began in Roman times, it's said. And there was a huge spike in the historical context of disinformation in the 15th century when the printing press was invented. And at the moment, we're also seeing a huge spike, and particularly in Japan. Just last year, according to figures published by the Nikkei, the number of deep fake scams in Japan increased by 28 times last year. Not 28%, 28 times. And so we're seeing that new technology is enabling some of these scammers to overcome the language barrier and really have a much greater impact in Japan. At the same time, though, we're actually seeing a decrease in the number of fact-checking organizations around the world. They're decreasing, according to the Duke University, by around about 3% every year consistently, and that's mainly due to funding issues, that it's hard to get people to pay for fact-checking. As a result, we have an environment where the environment is becoming much more critical and complex, and yet the traditional defenses against that environment are actually becoming weaker. And so it's really up to organizations and individuals to take it upon themselves and think about different ways that they can both defend and protect themselves against disinformation and misinformation. And we have a great panel today of 4 experts in their various areas to talk about this. And so I'd just like to kick it off, first of all, because we do have the advantage of having 4 really good different perspectives on this, and ask each of the panelists to just give us a little bit of a size and scope type introduction. From where they're standing, what are they seeing in terms of the world of disinformation and misinformation? And maybe we'll start with Alice, if you'd like.
In terms of the size and scope, I'll sort of like pick up from where you left off a little bit, talking about the printing press here. So we saw a really big increase in the amount of information. When the internet came about and we started seeing I'm coming from this news perspective here, media and news, we saw a huge increase in information. We saw it become plentifully available to lots and lots of people. And so we see this barrier to entry for information and misinformation, which kind of go together. We see that barrier drop significantly. So traditionally, news organizations are looked to for journalism and dissemination. So you sort of trust your local news organization when the printing press is starting, or your local publication. And over time, what we've seen is as that barrier to entry has decreased, as more people are able to access information from everywhere, we don't really know our news source anymore the way we used to. So we don't have that human relationship, but we have an algorithmic relationship that came up right after the internet. So we have algorithms giving us this curatorial process that we used to rely on local papers for. And so there's a huge advantage in that we have lots of scale, lots more information people are creating, lots more access. But we also have a problem in that people sort of over-trusted the algorithms to be better than humans almost, or be able to do this at scale well. So what we have in this sort of size and scope now is information can happen globally at any time. Lots of people are getting it, but the algorithms can sort of push you into a certain information space, even if you're not willingly going down that direction and you're trusting that. So When I think about the size and scope of this problem, I think about printing press is a great example of one piece. I think about the internet. And now with AI, we had machine learning before that, and now this is AI. We also have a huge lowering of this barrier. So now what we have is the creation side. A little less on the curation side, though that's still happening. We still have algorithms feeding us the content, and we still have this filter bubble problem. On the creation side, now we have a really big problem in that this barrier has lowered enough that the quality of the information is decreasing rapidly. So we have algorithms that are able to disseminate this information really quickly. They pick up on key information that humans really like. We've trusted these systems, and then we started trusting them less. So now we have a complicated size and scope issue. So we've got news and media from the sort of curation and dissemination standpoint. A lot of those pieces have been taken over by machine learning algorithms or AI at different points. And now we're moving a little bit more back towards how do we have humans and machines come together so that we can get our arms around something that the scope of can be much, much faster than for the humans.
Wow, that's a really, really great explanation of what's going on. The ability to create that content and then have to disseminate it it's sort of, as I was listening to that, I was thinking, wow, that's almost Terminator-like. It's quite scary. Antoine, you work for Edelman, and they have recently taken the step of creating what is called the Counter Disinformation Unit, which I think is great. And I guess that is in reaction to what you're seeing from your clients in terms of their concerns over misinformation, disinformation. So perhaps can you give us a little bit of size and scope from what you're seeing?
Thank you very much, Ross, and good afternoon, everyone. I guess a couple of pointers here, just in terms of how this is playing out with our clients. So in the Counter Disinformation Unit at Edelman, we look at data points, right, and where we can best support clients. So the first thing we've seen in Japan is that 8 out of 10 Japanese chief marketing officers or chief communication officer believe that they will face serious threats in terms of misinformation and disinformation over the next 3 years, right? So the vast majority of business professionals in this area think this is a top threat. It's ranked number 1 in their priorities, and that's 8 out of 10 roughly saying that. The second piece is that 77% of them also say that they are worried that they are not equipped to respond to the issue. So essentially, crisis management protocols, procedures are not adapted to an AI-driven world. And Ross, you've been in this field for a long time. You know that this is all about preparedness, but it looks like businesses are not entirely sure what it is that they should be focusing on first to really address the issue. And that's a problem because in times, and I'm kind of zooming a little bit out of Japan, but of course, Japan is in this time of political kind of change too. We know that elections, political changes are echo chambers, and they are conducive to obviously more misinformation and more disinformation. The challenge with that is that we know that people use their purchasing power to vote in many ways, right? So in another study that we ran, and you may be familiar with that, is that 60% roughly of the people, when they go and engage in a buying, if you will, action, they will essentially express a political view, right? And so all those things surrounded by misinformation really affect behaviors that can be material to businesses when it comes to impacting their stakeholder base. And it's been, if we look at Asia Pacific at large, it has translated in issues, especially in the south of the region, for American brands, for instance, that have been challenged with regard to their position around the Gaza conflict, right? And so there's a real immediate impact between or connection between the political situation, the way misinformation is happening, and what people are doing in the face of it. So I think what we're seeing here, we're moving from political uncertainty to some sort of politicized anxiety, right? So people go in their daily lives, and at the dinner table, the question around what's being said in the news has now enter the household of the citizens who are looking and watching the news. So I'm with you on the point that, the challenge of fact checking and continuing to invest on that field is absolutely critical, not only for businesses, but also for democracy.
Thanks very much. I was reading something the other day that was suggesting that the world of influencers, influencers that you pay money to advertise your product, was now actually contracting, and it was being replaced by de-influencers, where your competitors would pay people to publish negative information on you, and that was actually getting more traction because the influencers were just all, oh, it's wonderful, I really love this, and that's getting boring, and yet the information being put out by the de-influencers was actually a lot more interesting and getting more traction, so we can talk to that. Lisa, you do a lot of work with companies in helping to identify misinformation, disinformation, so what are you seeing?
So from our perspective, Lisa Kaplan, founder and CEO of Alethea, started the company 5.5 years ago after working actually on political campaigns. But what we see is that it's no longer just a threat that's confined to state actors. We oftentimes will see financially motivated individuals. We sometimes see competitive companies do this to each other. But we're seeing that there's really an increase or proliferation of actors across the open web who appear to be leveraging this type of information to target other organizations in order to achieve their goals. Oftentimes it's at the expense of an organization's bottom line, their ability to attract and retain talent, their ability to maintain their license to operate, including globally. And so some of what we're seeing is that companies can get proactive because the thing about these types of disinformation attacks is they occur out in the open. So if you're able to catch it early, you can get out in front of it. And we do see that there is a lot of success if we actually broaden how we think about mitigation. So yes, it is a communications response, but it doesn't always need to be a public communications response. There's a lot of power that can be had from preparing teams, from thinking about how do you prepare, for example, a call center to be able to respond when asked about disinformation. So really in getting creative and looking at mitigating these types of threats, the team sports helps because the threat itself has just gotten much more diffuse as it's coming from multiple different areas. And it's targeting virtually every organization to varying degrees.
Thank you. Takashi, my company last year was one of a number of companies because of buoyancy in the market where we saw a lot of fake advertising. I think at one point we had about 360 different ads on Facebook claiming to be able to tell investors the next stock that was going up by 10 times. And of course, when you clicked there, you got sent to some weird line account, and there were a number of people who had lost money. And of course, a lot of very famous celebrities were also the targets of these sorts of ads. And it really did raise the volume of the conversation around the need for legislative and legal protection. What are you seeing in response of legislation in the legal world?
Thank you. Yeah. Actually, we have, and also Japanese government have much concern, serious concern about such situation, and we have several regulations on these deepfakes and also misinformation and disinformation from last year. So far, as to misinformation and disinformation, we have so far have the regulation on the providers. The internet service providers' liability, and but it's a very unclear regulation, and main regulations are relied on self-regulatory guidelines. So many people, affected people, are much concerned about how when my claim is responded by internet service providers, or my deepfakes is when my deepfakes is deleted by internet service providers. So in this May, Japanese government amended totally our data protection. Our legislation on such deepfakes and misinformation and disinformation. And also as to AI deepfakes, we have not so specific law regulating AI, but we have an intellectual property law and criminal laws focusing on such fraud or very defamative content generated by AI.
Would you say that we have made major improvements in those amendments in May? I know the issue when we went, it was before May, when we went to our lawyers, they said, oh, well, you can, lodge a claim and you do this, and maybe, several months later, we might be able to get them taken down.
Yeah, actually, the new law was not come into effect. Actually, probably that new law will come into effect next April or next May. Yeah, so we just waiting for the situation improving. Yeah, but I believe some big deepfakes, financial deepfakes are deleted already by the self-regulatory for those service providers.
Alice, what is the reaction? What does the reaction need to be from news organizations? Because I'm a PR guy, and when I started in PR several decades ago, we were always taught that PR was much more successful than advertising because it had the third-party credibility of the media. And by going through the media, it made whatever you were saying much more credible. But we now face a world where maybe the credibility of the media is being shaken. And so what can the media do or be doing to shore up and make sure that they are excluding disinformation and misinformation from their reporting?
Yeah, and I'm going to speak a bit from the sort of machine learning AI perspective on this, but in general, I think what media can do is really focus on the quality of the content they're producing and how that's going to interface now with these algorithms, and how does that affect their business? Like, how do they use that to disseminate this information correctly? If the goal is to have a populace that trusts the media and also gives credibility to other agencies, we really need to be able to know that what we're getting from that agency or that news source is quality information, is something we trust. It's something we really want to make sure we don't miss. They perform a really essential function in society in general. So there are lots of different kinds of issues we could talk about now in media, right? There's an evolution of this business model that's been happening for a while. It's going to happen again, or it's going to push that evolution farther now that we have these AI models in the loop. But one thing that's also happening is thinking really deeply about the sort of incentives, both financially for the institutions, but also for the models. And so part of where we run into trouble is humans are great. Humans that are consuming the news are great. We are sort of prone to want more information that seems really interesting, exciting, engaging, potentially protects us from harm, right? So we get into this space where quite naturally on the algorithmic side, more information is being shown to us that is salacious or very interesting or sort of unbelievable in a sense. And so from a media organization perspective, I think it's still their job in society to hold this post and say, we're sort of the last stop for that trust in this information. Humans actually won't be able to judge the validity of information very well very soon. Large language models, sort of this wave of AI has come along and made the sort of creation part of this sound really smart. And so it's really hard as a human, if you're consuming information and it sounds really smart, not to think, great, that sounds right to me. Before this, really, if we go back to, let's say, 2018, if a machine was making this information whole cloth or was doing the creation process, it sounded kind of dumb and unbelievable. And we could mostly be like, that seems weird, nah. And so from the sort of media organization's perspective, there is this tidal shift coming. Content is going, like the barrier to create content is going to zero. The cost is going to zero. the dissemination of it is also, the cost of that has also gone way, way down. And we have people that are non-journalists sort of in the mix now already. We're not undoing that ball of wax. And so I think from this point forward, the focus really should be on, if you're a news organization, you're really looking at your content and you're looking at how that content gets used down the road. Do you use this information? Do you license this out to these big language model companies to train their data? What are the pitfalls with that, right? If your information is really credible, you're focusing on high quality information, you hand it over, it gets in this pool of information with everything from Reddit and the internet at large. You know, all that's really serving right now is to make these sound even smarter, which makes the problem even harder. But from a perspective of a sort of, we focus more on news aggregation, but if you're a single publisher, it is a fight right now to think about, okay, how does your business model continue to change and grow with this? If the cost of these things is going way down and the content on its face really looks kind of good, your curatorial voice, your journalism, your actual fact, being a place for trusted news and being a place where people make sure they go to for this news is going to be the differentiator for them.
Wow. Lisa, yes, you had to comment.
So I agree with everything that was just mentioned, and I'd also like to add the perspective that the way that we see disinformation work is because it is catering to those individuals' biases. And so when you think about all of the dynamics that were just described, while there's no necessarily single news source anymore that everybody trusts, everybody does trust a news source. And so thinking about that when you're looking at your counter messaging strategy can be really important. It also opens up a different type of attack that the Russians have exploited time and time again through a network that's called Doppelganger, where they will spin up fake websites that appear to be a legitimate news outlet. And if you look closely, you'll see that the domain is actually an impersonation or an imposter, but it's borrowing all of the branding and all of the credibility. Our team is made up of technical experts, and so we're oftentimes uncovering some of these networks for the first time. And we actually released last week through the Washington Post a Russian network that was targeting brands. The Russians, of course, when they're spreading disinformation campaigns, it's an extension of their military policy, but they're essentially targeting brands in order to borrow from their engagement, borrow all of that brand credibility that communicators have built up, and essentially leverage those logos, those different lines of effort, those campaigns in order to achieve their goals. So one of the things that we're seeing is, as it relates to disinformation campaigns, is because of some of these dynamics around the algorithms and how information is shown, disinformation networks are then able to leverage those biases, the distrust that's grown, increased polarization, in order to target individuals and essentially make brands the collateral damage.
Wow. So, as Antoine will know, agencies like Edelman spend a lot of time with their clients trying to get better engagement with the brand and create much more credibility for that brand. So what you're saying is all that great work that's being done and those emotional attachments that are being formed between consumers and that brand are actually now being leveraged. Those biases are being leveraged, and that emotional context is being leveraged for disinformation. Wow, that's quite scary. Antoine, how do you think brands might react to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, those are great points. And I think, I mean, the way we operate now in terms of helping clients build trust is really assuming that we have entered an era of deep doubt. And we are really, to borrow a cybersecurity word or theme, it's really a zero trust landscape that we are operating in, unfortunately, now. So, I mean, fundamentally, business need to understand, where do you need trust and where are you asking for trust? So in the context of misinformation and disinformation, you have to know where is the trust you can't afford to lose. And that question is absolutely fundamental, because when you zoom in and zero in into your strategic imperatives to succeed on the market, you have to be crystal clear in terms of where you absolutely need to defend and where is the trust that you can't afford to lose. The second piece that I would say around this, and just building on the points that were made earlier, is that you have, as a brand, your own drivers of trust, your strength, and that you can continue to push forward. The challenge now is that there is such an explosion of content, because it costs nothing not to publish something smart any longer. Thank you, OpenAI. That you really need to know what is the point that you want to make and to who you want to make it. I think back just a few years ago, we had those big, large corporate narratives hoping that they would protect, etc. The reality now is that they are becoming vague ideas. But where's the trust what is the trust you need? Who do you need to trust this thing? That link here needs to be protected at all costs and built, because that's your lifeline in the face of misinformation.
Oh. Takashi, the legal responses, to my mind, you need to know the black and white. Okay, this is good information. Oh, this is false information. So therefore, you go and speak to a lawyer and see what you can do about having that false information take down. But in the scenario we've just heard, the lines between what looks like bad information and what looks like good information are being blurred considerably. Do you think that the legal environment can work at the speed to counter some of these developments?
Thank you. Yeah, actually, under the new act about the misuse and the disinformation, the new act requires large platform providers to take actions within 7 days.
Within 7 days.
Yeah, and but actually, it might be very difficult to judge which is bad or which is good information, and if the provider cannot determine whether it is not or bad, provider should own burden to prove, or just we cannot determine this at this moment. So please go to court to determine.
I can see a future where Lisa's firm is engaging with law firms, identifying misinformation, and then you taking the legal actions against that, maybe for some of Antoine's clients and people that are reading the news as well. So I'd like to just now, we're a little bit early, but just turn to the audience because this is an area which I think is something that affects every single person and every single organization increasingly. And Shikata-san is going to put his hand up there. Shikata-san. Do we have a microphone?
My name is Shikata, and I have been working on public affairs for Prime Minister Kishida during the last 3 years, and started to work on this issue of disinformation, as we have included this in our national security strategy. And when I talk to like-minded countries, governments, we are increasingly paying attention to this issue of FIMI, foreign information manipulation and interference. And given the rise of AI, and as we see a number of cases, when I attended NATO Stratcom strategic communication meeting, they are paying more attention to collaboration between China and Russia on this kind of disinformation practices. So my question is, if you are advisor, for say the Japanese Prime Minister or other democratic governments, what are your key recommendations in order to tackle these challenges, mainly coming from authoritarian states?
Okay, it just so happens in the pre-meeting, Lisa had mentioned the connection between Russia and China. So Lisa, can you take a step at that first?
Absolutely. So I would say Russia has been investing in this capability for much longer in a much more sophisticated way than other autocratic states. But what we're observing is that a lot of these autocratic states are sharing the playbook, potentially cross-training with each other, and also working not necessarily in concert, but together where it makes sense. And so one thing that we've observed just generally is tactics have shifted is that increasingly China used to use more wolf warrior diplomacy and also used to mostly use its influence operations to promote China, almost as if it were China's PR. Since I would say about 2021, we started to see China become much more aggressive and really adopt the Russian playbook of seeking to divide countries, to use this as part of its efforts to foment politicization and polarization as well. What I always recommend, especially for democracies to think about, is autocratic adversaries are fast. They have no limitations on what they will do to collect data, and they will throw anything against the wall just to see if something will work. And there's no real perceived risk or accountability if something doesn't go well. Often what I will recommend is that democracies recognize that they have trust with their citizens. People elected them, they trust them, they feel that they are held, that public servants are held accountable to voters. And one of the best things that I think democracies can do is to expose and educate, to be able to play the role of being able to call out a Chinese or a Russian disinformation campaign for what it is. In the United States' experience, this has been extremely successful, particularly around Russia's invasion of Ukraine, around Russia, China, Iran targeting the United States. One action we've seen be really successful is exposing those networks. What that does is it creates a conversation. It adds really important context of not only is this not true, but it's coming from an autocratic government, from a messaging perspective. From a security perspective, it often creates the pressure on platforms that have terms of service to actually take down those networks. It's oftentimes a violation of the rules when you expose this type of information. And then finally, it builds resilience. We've been talking about foreign disinformation impacting organizations at Alethea for the past almost 6 years. And that conversation has now snowballed into important conversations like today, where different angles and different perspectives are coming together. So the more that we continue to talk about what's actually happening, to have real case studies, to bring different perspectives, legal, communication, security together, that will actually move the needle. And government can really be a great convener to make that happen as well.
If you go to Lisa's LinkedIn page, there's an article that she has at the bottom of some analysis she did. It was actually from 2019 on the Soul Publishing. Lisa, I just read that story. I thought, wow, this is like fiction.
That was a fun one.
And she identified that the third largest reach of any entertainment company in the world was actually a company that was run out of Cyprus by Russians. And they had millions and millions of subscribers on YouTube and were producing all this negative content. The issue of education, how do we educate and bring this out into the open, because it sounds like that is one of the key things. Alice, education, bringing it out into the open, making it a more open discussion and highlighting some of the aspects of disinformation.
Yeah, and on this point, I just want to sort of put out there that as this landscape shifts really quickly, on the education front here, pretty quickly humans won't be able to tell the difference at all between real information and false information, and we're going to rely more and more on the algorithms to partner with us to do that decision making. So I think what's incredibly important is that people understand that this is gone. We've already tipped over. And so people need to understand how to work with the algorithms effectively. And we also need to understand what data is fueling these algorithms, right? So a lot of the newer AI algorithms are helpful in decision making. So I won't get into politics whatsoever, but going back from sort of a national perspective, thinking about what data is going into the models that you're using and whether your sort of humans on the ground judge that to be real, legitimate information or not is incredibly important. And probably having different models for different places is going to be really, really important. So educating people on how to create those models, hopefully that's already happening in places, but educating people that are making decisions that are using this information to be able to have that thought partner effectively and also to be critical of that thought partner. So not just completely rely on, okay, well, the algorithm seems really, really smart, because it's going to sound smarter and smarter and smarter.
So in terms of bringing things out into the open, is there a role for governments to create an agency, for instance, that identifies misinformation, disinformation, and then publicizes that so that people are getting more used to it? I'm reminded of an incident many years ago now, but I'd taken some of our younger employees when I was at Edelman out for dinner, and one of the young interns made the comment that she would not trust any individual that did not have an Instagram account. And it sort of blew me away. And I said, I don't have an Instagram account, And I said, but how do you know that what is on the Instagram account is true? And she said, well, I sort of can see it. I can see through the fake news. And as you're saying, Alice, that is actually going to get harder to do. But what did strike me later as I thought about that conversation was that was just her way of validating someone in a world where, people who had grown up, young people who had grown up in a world of lower trust than what happened when I was growing up, they were already compensating for that. Is there an automatic compensation that humans will go through that will enable them to survive in this environment a little bit better?
I think this question's for me. Yes, and it will be it will undermine the entire system. So we have adapted to trust humans. And so what this person is doing is saying, oh, I have a verifiable source. It could be an influencer. It could be someone on Instagram. And so we use that as a shortcut for saying this information is legitimate. Like you're saying, that's going to get harder and harder. And what we said with the brand piece here, tying it back together, is that those brands and that information is now being copied at an alarming rate. And so even if it was a legitimate person that they sort of trusted, somebody could really quickly copy not only sort of the look and feel of that, but the way it sounds. So you can start to produce content that sounds sort of like that thing that you trusted. So I think humans will fall back on that. And I think it will be a vicious cycle for a while.
Okay, Lisa. Yes.
There's actually some really important work that's being done right now that isn't necessarily represented, I think, by any of us on this panel, around the authentication of media. And I think that there will be an effort. There's a lot of conversation around, for example, deepfake detection. My personal view is once the deepfake is out there, it's too late. Because by the time you detect it, you're on the back foot. And so one of the things that we're seeing is there's a lot of innovative companies out there that are doing things like putting blockchain technologies to essentially create DNA for videos so that you know where it came from and how it was created. I do think that there's a world in which we have trained people or taught people to have the expectation of authentication instead of always having to be on the back foot and saying, no, this didn't happen. One thing I always recommend, though, that everybody does, and this is something that can be helpful even just starting today, is there are ways that you can approach this challenge as well that don't even require a resource investment. Being able to take a video of principals when they're speaking so that you have a record, for example, in case something ever gets created or turned into a deepfake. Because what Alice is talking about is a very real threat. we're already starting to see it happen and target some of the leading corporations that we work with, their executive teams, their management teams. And we also see it happening in closed spaces as well. So there are different types of attacks with this impersonation effort. For example, you can create an AI video where it looks as though it's somebody else versus who it really is. So for example, the question would be, how do you know it's really me, Lisa Kaplan, speaking right now, instead of somebody who's created a deep fake from other videos of other public speaking events and is pretending to be me? So there are different efforts like that to consider as well as you're thinking about your broader strategy.
I'm reminded of a quite recent incident, I think it was in Hong Kong, where the head of the Hong Kong subsidiary of a major multinational company had joined a Zoom conference, and his Zoom conference was with the CFO and a couple of other senior executives, and the CFO told him that there was a secret project going on and that he needed to wire $25 million, I think it was, to this account without telling anyone else because it was a very, very secret product. So he wired the $25 million and then called up his CFO to say, I've done what you asked me. And the CFO said, what? And it was a complete deep fake Zoom conference. And so, Antoine, does that mean that, we have spent many, many years talking about the CEO being the face of the company as a way to avoid this? Are we now going to see executives shying away from public appearances so that we're not actually creating that data bank that people can then misuse?
Yeah, well, I hope not, and the opposite needs to happen. But really, a couple of points before I get to this question, Ross, if I may. Back to Lisa's point around, there is a real idea around the tokenization of trust, which is essentially out of blockchain technologies. How do you make sure that you get the sequence of events and the necessary authentication of what has happened right for businesses, so that you can reconstruct the reality, essentially. And that is really coming up very, very quickly. On the back of it, what is moving now in the corporate world is, I think what also Alice was mentioning, is the role of pre-bunking and understanding that misinformation is really a manipulation and alteration of context to undermine trust, really. So that it's going to happen for your business. Therefore, what is it that you do in terms of scenario planning, proactive mitigation strategies to get there before it goes there, right? And you address this. And within that, Ross, to your point, I think it's an exercise of leadership, but all the data that we have now in the studies we run around this is that leaders vaguely understand that something is coming, don't know exactly what is going on, and therefore I have data point there which I'm not going to discuss, but therefore largely under-resource the effort that is requested to address this incoming threat. And I think we would agree in saying that we are just scratching the surface, but the movement is to happen now.
Takashi, it seems to me that this creates a whole new sort of area of litigation, because you're going to have misinformation that doesn't even look like misinformation. It just looks totally normal. And it could be a Zoom meeting, or it could be a video, or it could be something that ends up resulting in major fraud. And the litigation around that must be absolutely complex in order to do that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Actually, seems difficult to find a technically or by human power. So Japanese government, MIC, Ministry of Internal Affairs Communication, issued a report on misuse, how to combat against misuse, misinformation and disinformation. And in that report, we have to establish the multi-holder members meeting or study group among the providers and users and end users, of course, and the content holders. And also they strength on focus on how to bring AI literacy among the end users. Yeah, of course, it should take some time, but I believe each individual users should be aware of the risks by such a normal scams and deepfakes.
Thank you. I think it seems to me that maybe because of the complacency and a sense of overconfidence caused by the language barrier, Japan is somewhat behind the rest of the world in catching up. And so I would certainly urge Shikata-san to talk to his colleagues and make sure that when we're looking at solutions at this, that we are drawing on information sources from around the world, because if we're just joining on Japanese, I think, based solutions, we're still going to be behind the curve. So I'd now like to turn to question time. Anyone have any questions? Yes.
I'm kind of curious about what are the ideal requirements for the disinformation AI partnering a tool. So some of it, for example, is it shouldn't kind of make decisions. So currently, for example, ChatGPT or Gemini, when kind of on sensitive topic, it sort of mentions something, but it does make some a judgment call in terms of what it recommends as a default answer, as if it's a truth. So it shouldn't have it. I also feel it shouldn't have entertainment element, because once you have entertainment, it's a fight of entertainment rather than a fight of the factuality information. And then other stuff is maybe you should talk about the statistics and causality. So really, it should be open about all sorts of views in the world. So in this country, 30% believe in this because of these causals. So you should have this a statistics and causality comprehensively for everything. But I'm kind of curious, what you kind of see as the ideal AI partner for this information.
Okay, Alice.
Yes, I'll take this one. I don't think we know what the ideal is quite yet, so I'll start with that. I think there are a couple of components. So I think one is thinking of a system that helps you boost sort of or remove all of this time that you would have spent sifting through information, and sort of can get you a possible set of pieces of information to look at. So these algorithms are really good at doing that. That's great. Fantastic. I think another piece of it that we're sort of looking at now is not taking the information at face value. So if an algorithm recommends information right now, with some, depending on which algorithms you're using, if you're using large language models, you can ask it why, and you can also ask it how confident it is. And this is not sort of a Bayesian statistical confidence level of things, which would be amazing. Please work on that, because that would really get us farther. But what we get is a little bit of insight. So I think that is another crucial piece of any thought partner, but really these algorithmic thought partners, in saying, okay, so here's sort of why I'm recommending this. And then you can start to steer it. The steering is a little bit tricky because the spaces these models are traversing is really nonlinear. And what that means is if you're trying to sort of push it in a direction and say no, that's not quite right, they're getting better and better all the time at following those instructions and kind of going to the right part of that information space that they're pulling from, but they're not perfect at it. So they're improving that piece, which will just, I think, happen over time, and lots of good people working on this. But the crucial piece there is that you can have a back and forth with that thought partner. So that thought partner is doing a lot of the grunt work to gather the information, and so you're not having to go do that piece, making it steerable, and then making sure that that sort of system can adapt over time is maybe the third critical piece in this. And so new information obviously comes into the world all the time, but the human is also getting new information all the time from different sources that the model doesn't have. And so I think another piece there is making sure that the human can communicate back and forth with the model. Hey, I've got new information. You don't have this information yet. And you need to take that into your thinking when we're thought partnering now. Humans are really bad at this. They're really, sorry, we're just atrocious. Even if you have a colleague or somebody you're working with as a thought partner, remembering the 17 things that have happened to you that day or that you've learned from somebody else to convey to that person is a huge information breakdown in any system. But it's going to be really prevalent here as well, and making sure that model has the right context. Because if you believe that it's sharing context with you as a thought partner, right, you're seeing it kind of like a human, but a better version because it's an algorithm, you might make assumptions that it has context that it doesn't have. So I would focus on those pieces.
Okay, next question. Sorry, Lisa, yes, you want to comment?
The one other thing I just wanted to mention is we are seeing some interesting work because, and I completely agree with everything that Alice said, especially around just the interaction between these algorithms and the end users and the people who are then trying to just make decisions faster by leveraging this type of technology. But I think when it comes to disinformation, I would also point out that if we can just call AI fancy math for a second, and it's about what data are you putting in and what data are you getting out, there will never be a complete data set. And that's because in terms of these narratives that are out there, and there's a lot of interesting work that's being done right now to try to understand, okay, if a lot of this information is flowing in encrypted spaces or in places that may be harder to reach, or information is just always going to be incomplete. One of the other interesting things we've seen as an approach is looking at disease modeling. And how does community interaction, how does mass, like certain super spreader events, those sorts of things. And this was going on long before COVID, but the idea of where there are also similar challenges or similar breakdowns in information flows. Disease modeling has been a really interesting framework for trying to take a look at how to better leverage technology to solve disinformation challenges.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? The question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Reynard Yu. I'm originally from the Philippines. So in our political scene, recent elections actually showed that certain political dynasties have been using misinformation campaigns to push their own propaganda. So my question is, what can we do with regards to this issue, considering that the government has a vested interest in manipulating the narrative in their own favor?
Lisa, I think that might be one for you.
Yeah, that one's for me.
Not outside third parties, but actually governs themselves.
I'm trying to think of how to let's just start with, I understand what you're talking about in that dynamic, and it is really challenging. This is where I think there's an important opportunity to tap into the research community and civil society. So also individuals like Maria Risa and others who have been working on misinformation and disinformation, being able to maintain and support a vibrant press and a free press. If that is a situation where sometimes that media may need to come from outside of the country, just depending on the country. For example, if you're, and the Philippines isn't necessarily in this situation, but I'm also thinking about countries where there may be actual censorship and media outlets can't write certain points of view. I definitely recommend leveraging those third parties. This is where I think some of the way that the platforms operate, and we could probably have 6 entire panels with the same group about the pros and cons of the way the platforms have tried to address disinformation. But one of the things about the platforms is they are often not likely to respond well to government requests to take down information that governments don't like. They will take down information if it appears to be a violation of terms of service, like bots, et cetera. But this is where I think there's an opportunity to leverage these systems to be able to continue to highlight civil society, free press, particularly in situations where a member of government may be actually using disinformation against the people that are that elected that individual to represent them.
So the concept of freedom of information and free speech and the right to free speech is actually a really, really critical concept at the moment. I know in Australia, they're introducing a new law around disinformation, and the minister apparently can make a decision as to whether something is disinformation. And you can see how constructs like that have potential downside in the future, and you see quite a lot of arguments around free speech being raised in the legal context. Yes.
Going along that same line, living in America, hate speech is a very big thing. And I would say semi-true comments are also kind of an issue. In what ways are we kind of finding a success in combating that? And then additionally, looking at if we are in this no trust society, how do we rebuild trust? If we've had consumers that have been hurt by it, or we're launching a business, how do we start to build that up?
Would you like to take the first?
Yeah, I'll take I have one perspective on this. So thinking about hate speech, or I can't remember the term you used, but sort of half-true comments or maybe true comments there. I think there's a two-part to this. One is the algorithms that are creating this information that could be true or not, or people are using them. We're sort of relying more and more on those algorithms to know what's true and what's not in this situation. The other algorithms I talked about are not large language models, or not this very new AI. Those are the ones that are serving content to people and the ones that are making it more prevalent. So if we think about the way these models are trained, they're right now mostly still trained on the internet of, what's available digitally on the internet. And so if you think about a system that would average this information and say, okay, this information seems actually more important or maybe more true because it occurs more frequently. And we're seeing more engagement with it if you add those metrics in. So I think sort of combating that piece is going to mean going back to, not the beginning, but back through and saying, what information's coming into the model? How are we making that information frequency important or not important in the training of the model? And if we focus then on not having as much of that hate speech in there, not stomping on people's free speech necessarily here, but saying, okay, if it's just the normal amount people would say on their own, if we were all in a room, or even if we had anonymous message boards and it wasn't algorithmically upranking this information all of the time, it would be a much lower probability in the model that the next thing that they would think about or the next thing it would predict would be hate speech or something terrible. So I think what we need to do is think about the information that's being generated now, but really what is the underlying data to train it?
Antoine, sorry, Lisa, go ahead. Yes, you raised your hand.
Yeah, so I think the other question that I heard in that was, what do you do about these half-truths or hate speech? I do think, unfortunately, one of the things that we've observed, and just because you asked about the United States context, is what I call an acceptance and a rise in the isms. So whether that's racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, Islamophobia, etc., we are starting to see a lot of that language increase. And the way it's playing out from our perspective is it makes it so that individuals are being targeted, especially in their capacity as representing organizations or ideas. So oftentimes we'll see these tactics used to try to harass, intimidate, and it can create physical risks of violence. So it's something we pay very close attention to. We've actually trained models to identify threatening language just because we think it's a better indicator of risk than sentiment. So we are looking at different ways to be able to adapt to the way that people are talking online. And then the question of half-truths. So every good disinformation campaign is made up of half-truths. Because if it's not true, it's so easy to deal with. You can say, not only is this not true, it's coming from Russia. Or not only is this not true, but here's evidence that it's not true. A lot of times what we'll see are things like, and this is another US example, but somebody taking advantage of an information vacuum or the absence of information. So we've seen, for example, allegations that Taylor Swift and Jamie Dimon made political endorsements that they never made. Okay, well then that puts the individual in a situation where they either have to disclose who they are going to endorse, or remain quiet and tacitly agree. So there's a question of how to deal with those half-truths. We always recommend taking a multi-pronged approach because you can't just oftentimes go to the lawyers and say, this is false and defamatory, because there is that kernel of truth. So that's where you really do need to take a deep strategic approach to it, but also invest in ongoing trust with your stakeholders as well, because you don't want to show up when you're being accused of something and say, no, we're all good here. And they'll say, hi, we've never met you before.
Okay, thank you. Antoine, you have raised your hand. You have 15 to 20 seconds to add some.
Thank you, Ross. Alice, Lisa, just building on the point. So the first thing is that we really need to acknowledge, I think, as business leaders and societal leaders, that the breakdown of trust is creating really the perfect storm in the context of bigger issues, climate change, geopolitical tension, generative AI. So this breakdown of trust is happening at the moment, which is making it very critical for the entire society, really. The second piece, I think, to the point around how do we rebuild trust? One is perhaps starting with ensuring that we are trustworthy leaders. Right? So how do we lead with trust at the core, with values at the core? And starting from this point on, you can really actively manage trust, because I think one of the things that seldom happen, or is a common belief, is that we believe that we do good things and then trust will happen. This is not true. You need to actively, deliberately manage trust in a way that is conducive to the outcomes that you're looking for. And that's my invitation to you as business leaders is don't leave trust alone, do something with it. It can change really the way you operate.
Okay, thank you very much. Takashi. 15 seconds.
Just one thing about the AI regulation. Japanese government has so far a softer approach. I mean, no legal regulation on AI. But from this summer, we Japanese government have to consider how to legal regulation about AI, including AI algorithm. So it might be AI algorithm regulation might be a solution to deepfakes or hate speech, maybe.
Okay, thank you very much. We are a little bit over time, but if you would, round of applause for our panelists today.